I awoke at 2:13 a.m. to the unmistakable sound of a small wet sigh drifting up from beneath my mattress. In that single breath, I remembered every childhood night I'd spent praying that nothing with claws lived under my bed. If you think the noise was just a creaky spring or an overeager pipe, you can stop reading now. But if you've ever felt a presence watching you from the darkness below, keep the lights on and stay with me, because what I found down there last week doesn't fit into any bedtime story, and it certainly isn't gone yet. My name is Colin Reeves. I'm 32, an actuary by trade, which means I deal in probabilities and avoid back of these mind fears, especially the ones I carried as a kid. To me, the numbers never lie. Numbers always say the monster 1-to-3 ratio is 0-to-1. 0 monsters, 1 bed. Simple. Growing up in a drafty Victorian farmhouse, I begged my mom for a nightlight after hearing what sounded like fingernails grazing the floorboards under my box spring. She installed a bright plastic lighthouse that flooded my room with an orange haze. I still remember my dad's laugh. "There's nothing under there, sport," he'd say, lifting the skirts of dusty linen to prove it. But the lighthouse never fully erased the suspicion that something waited in the shadows for a chance to crawl out and taste skin. By the time college and rent checks arrived, the fear had dried up into a childhood myth filed away beside Santa and fortune cookies that promise world peace. Last month, owing to a promotion and a desperate need for shorter commutes, I signed a lease on a top-floor loft carved out of a century-old textile mill. Exposed brick, 18-foot ceilings, a view of the river's social media perfection. The delivery team wrestled my furniture upstairs, including the queen-size solid oak bed frame that I bought on sale. That bed sits 12 creeping inches above the hardwood. Plenty of room for dust bunnies, but nothing else, I told myself while sliding the frame into its corner. On move-in night, I chuckled over the memory of my childhood monster phobia, opened a bottle of Cabernet in celebration, and slept like a sedated bear. The noises began 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday. I had stayed late at the office, crunching risk tables for a reinsurer. I collapsed into bed around midnight, rolled over, and heard a faint knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate taps directly beneath my pillow. The sound was soft, polite even, as though my floor had become a hollow door someone was testing from the inside. I lay motionless, every muscle stiff, a trick of old beams, I concluded, even as my heart pounded. The next morning, the rational part of me laughed. Again, I blamed the vibrations on the freight elevator groaning in the shaft, 2 units over. But the pattern escalated. On Wednesday, a single scraping noise, like cloth dragging over splintered wood. On Thursday, a hushed, panting, rhythmic, not quite human, that faded the moment my feet hit the floor. On Friday, silence, which somehow unnerved me more. On Saturday, at 2 a.m., there was the wet sigh. You can run probabilities all day, but when a damp exhalation strokes the underside of your ear canal through an 8-inch memory foam mattress, numbers are irrelevant. I flung the comforter aside, grabbed my phone, and used the flashlight to peer under the bed. Nothing. All I saw was hardwood shining back at me, empty except for a sneaker and a tumbleweed of lint. I chalked the sigh up to dream residue, apologized to my adrenal glands for the overreaction, and told myself to book a therapist. Still, I set a cheap baby monitor on the floor beneath the frame before work on Monday. Data, I thought. Collect data. Eliminate doubt. That night, I climbed into bed earlier, phone face down to avoid doom scrolling. Rain lashed the windows with a pleasing hiss. I drifted off fast. At 3:07 a.m., the baby monitor crackled awake with a faint squeal of feedback. I half opened one eye, simultaneously annoyed and intrigued. A second later, a voice whispered, clear as a confession, "Colin, are you awake yet?" My bladder spasmed. The voice was crisp and mature, like an elementary school teacher coaxing a shy student. I lay there, petrified, while seconds ticked past. The monitor hissed again, softer. "Colin," it repeated, drawing out each syllable as if tasting it. I scrambled for my phone flashlight. Its beam sliced beneath the bed. All I saw were the dusty floorboards and the slender plastic cylinder of the monitor. The voice had ceased. I stayed up, white-knuckled, until sunrise painted the ceiling pink. When I replayed the audio file on the monitor's companion app, the recording was corrupted. Nothing but static. There's an actuarial table for mental health incidences in white-collar workers. Under 40, anxiety, auditory hallucinations, burnout. My percentage jumped from negligible to see a doctor. I was convinced the neighbor's baby monitor feed had bled into my. Over breakfast cereal, I vowed to unplug the device and stop the nonsense. 2 nights later, at 2:41 a.m., my phone rang. On the display, unknown caller. Against all my instincts, I answered. Silence. Then a moist inhale inches from the receiver. "Are you awake yet?" I hurled the phone across the room. The screen shattered, cutting the call short. Scooped it up, my heart thunderous, and forced a rational analysis. Someone pranking, maybe a voice changer with the number spoofed. I toggled airplane mode and attempted to sleep in the armchair, feet away from the bed. The following morning brightened with corporate monotony, spreadsheets, coffee, a birthday sheet cake for a coworker whose name I didn't know. Normalcy felt flimsy, like a cheap veneer. My gaze wandered to shadows under desks. Back at the loft, after dusk, I dreaded bedtime. I refused to sleep in that bed. I unrolled a camp pad on the living room floor. For added measure, I slid the oak frame away from the wall, checked every slat and corner with a flashlight. Nothing. At 1 a.m. I dozed off to the sound of distant barges on the river. Just 12 minutes later, a dull thump rattled through the ceiling. From upstairs or within my bedroom, I couldn't tell. Then the oak frame scraped across the floorboards, sliding back against the wall as though dragged by invisible hands. My bedroom door, which I'd left ajar, slowly shut with a click. I dashed to the front door and jerked the handle. It was locked tight. My own key refused to twist, as if the deadbolt had been welded. I kicked once, twice. The frame didn't budge. From down the hall, the voice returned, now lilting like a lullaby. "Colin, bedtime." I grabbed the caster and lamp off a side table and crept toward the bedroom, lamp raised. The door rested flush with the jamb, but cool air threaded from the gap at the bottom. The voice crooned softly inside, humming a tune I almost recognized. Rockabye Baby, slowed and warped by water. My palm hovered near the knob. What did I expect? A vagrant, a psych ward, escapee. Then I realized the worst truth. The voice had no footfalls, no rustling clothes. It radiated from the bed itself. I flung the door inward. The room was empty. Moonlight spilled through blinds onto a bed that sat flush to the wall again. The mattress looked untouched, advanced with the lamp shaking overhead. "Show yourself." My roar cracked. The hush that followed felt denser than air. I leaned down, eyes close to mattress level. The glow of my phone's flashlight bathing the space beneath. Floorboards bare, except, what was that? A smear of something dark near the center. I lay flat, sliding the lamp under until the entire underside lit up. That's when I saw it. At first, it seemed like a wet shadow. Then my mind rotated the image into comprehension. A mouth, vast and grinning, stretched across the underside of the mattress like a leech's maw, ringed with teeth as tiny as sewing needles. It yawned open, revealing a slick, pulsing throat descending into darkness. The smear on the floor wasn't a stain. It was an eye, round, pupilless, fixed on me with ancient hunger. Around the eye writhed limbs, too thin to be human, thorned like rose stems, gripping the slats of the frame. I convulsed backward, slamming into the dresser. The mouth hissed, expelling the moist syllable that was my name, Colin, drawn out by vocal cords that didn't belong in any mammal. My lamp slipped from my trembling hand. It smashed on the floor. The creature lunged. I managed to half-roll as something snapped past my ear, one of the stem-like limbs arrowing from my throat. The dresser splintered. Another limb whipped across my back, tearing my shirt and skin. Pain seared through me, oddly cold, as though ice water laced with razors had been poured over the wound. I slammed the door shut and shoved my body weight against it. Wood bucked as those thorned limbs thudded. Drywall cracked around the hinges. My phone lay in the living room, beyond reach. The relocked front door laughed at me from down the hallway. With survival's clarity, I remembered the baby monitor. Unit stored under the bed. If I could get it, perhaps I could. What? Threaten to record? Beg insanity. Get the thought stuck. The monitor transmitted on Bluetooth to the app. If the audio came through earlier, maybe the creature required that conduit, a mouthpiece. Destroy the monitor. Break its voice. The door shuddered again. Hinges groaned. Screws ripped loose. Time, I sprinted to the kitchen and snatched a pry bar from my toolbox. I returned to the battered door, took a breath, and flung it open like a lunatic Viking. To my surprise, the room was calm. No mouth, no limbs. The bed frame sat aligned, pristine. Even the dresser damage had vanished. Only the lamp shards and the blood on my torn shirt testified to the attack, and the baby monitor was blinking lazily atop the pillow. I approached with my pry bar raised. The monitor crackled. Come closer, it purred. Under here is warmer. Why me? I barked. A sigh. You listened. Children listen best. But you forgot your promise. What promise? At 7 years old, you asked me not to bite if you slept quickly. I honored that. You left. I waited. Now I'm hungry. My childhood memory surfaced, cowering under blankets, whispering bargains into the mattress. I'll go to sleep right away if you stay there. Kid logic, I pleaded, and something had listened. I swung the pry bar at the monitor. For impact, the bed erupted, mouth tearing through the mattress, rows of brass-colored teeth gnashing. The creature rose higher, revealing a body like a huge centipede made of knotted, leathery bed sheets, eyes studying its flank. I ducked, my weapon whipping wide. The monitor flew off the bed, skidding across the floor. The creature shrieked a cacophony of creaking bed springs and splintering wood and lunged after the device. Ignoring me, it wrapped its limbs around the plastic cylinder, caressing it. I grabbed a full-length mirror, leaning against the wall. The previous tenant's leftover, lifted it with a grunt, and hurled it down on the monitor and the monster. Glass exploded. Shards sliced the limbs. The monitor cracked open, exposing its circuits. The creature screamed, rearing up. Torn flesh vaporized into shadows, whirling like smoke. The centipede mass collapsed, sucked back under the bed with a final croak. Hungry, it vanished. Only shreds of torn linen and oily puddles remained. The front door latch clicked open on its own. Dawn bled through the windows. I'm not afraid to say I packed a backpack and fled, but that's not the end. I spent a week couch hopping, searching online for sleep experts and urban legends. Finally, at a motel in the next county, I dreamed of the grin under the bed. In the dream, I hovered above myself, watching the creature emerge from the motel carpet. No bed needed now. It whispered in my ear. I found a new mouthpiece and brandished a hotel alarm clock blinking 12 a.m. I woke, drenched in sweat. The clock by my head flashed 12:01, though I'd set it correctly previously. Since then, All electronics fail near me. Phones die. Speakers hiss my name. The monster didn't need the baby monitor. It only needed an invitation. The moment I acknowledged it wasn't a fantasy, I became its open doorway. Anything that hums electricity can become its voice. Any crawlspace, its lair. Tonight, I record this confession on a borrowed laptop. The battery at 3%. The power just flickered. From under the hostile bunk, I hear that wet sigh, closer than ever. If you grew up afraid of a monster under your bed, never speak to it. Never promise it anything, not even silence. Forgetting is the only chain that holds it down. It's break dead, and the mattress is merely its first hiding place, not its last. I'm switching off the laptop now. If you never hear from me again, check under your own bed before you sleep. If it whispers my name, please pretend you don't hear, 'cause once you answer, it learns yours too.